Welcome to Breakout Room 2 for the Restorative Language and Question session. I'm Emily Satterley with the P3 team, and I'll be your host for this session. I will be recording our session and monitoring the chat box. So if anyone has any questions during the session, feel free to drop those into the chat box and I'll keep an eye on those. Our presenters this afternoon are Jennifer Cook and Angel Jackson from Jefferson County Schools. I want to thank Jennifer and Angel for being with us to present this afternoon. I'll keep an eye on the time and let you know when we have 2 minutes left. We're excited to hear from you today, and now I will turn the session over to you.
Thank you very much, Emily. Make sure, can you hear me okay? Awesome. Thank you for the head nods. Just always important to check. You never know with technology these days. Sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. So thank you guys very much for having us today. Again, we are with Jefferson County Public Schools. My name is Jennifer Cook, and I am a district behavior systems consultant. And my colleague is with me today, Dr. Angel Jackson, who is also a district behavior systems consultant. Overall, we work with PBIS, restorative practices, MTSS, and classroom management. So those are kind of the umbrellas that we work around. Our presentation is linked in the one sheet for you to access. And there are links throughout the presentation that you're welcome to visit. And here you can see we have linked our behavior systems website. If you would like to take a look or have any questions, feel free and ask those at the end or contact us at any point after this today. Our emails are at the end. So with restorative practices, this began about 7 years ago in our district. And if you are not a restorative practices district or school, please don't worry. This information is for you as well. This is actually the one standalone training that we kind of do in our district because speaking nice to kids and speaking nice to our adults in our buildings can be done by anyone. You don't have to be a restorative practices school. But overall, when we do train our schools in restorative practices, it began with our partnership with IIRP, the International Institute of Restorative Practices. And it was a $3 million board investment back in 2017. And we began training schools in a wall-to-wall model. So, and what we mean by that is we trained everyone in the building that was willing and able to be trained. So not just our classroom teachers, not just our administrators, but we all included our assistants, our cafeteria staff, the bus drivers that interacted with and drove our kids to the schools. So not all the time was everyone able to make it, but we always invited them, and we encourage the more people that are able to get trained and are implementing this work, the better results we're going to have. Currently, we have 65 of our 155 schools that have been fully trained. We do have a transient population when it comes to our staff. So we do probably have more schools than that have restorative people in them. But on paper, we have 65 of our schools that have been trained from that wall-to-wall training. But overall, our goal is to get as many schools as possible. One question we do get often is, how do schools get chosen, right? The 65 of 155, it's really their choice, right? And so part of being restorative is getting that buy-in from their staff. So we always want to make sure that, the staff wants this training, the administration wants this training, and everyone is willing to kind of push forward with this work. So it really has to come from within the school as something that they want and they are ready for. Our learning goal today is quite simple. Just kind of learning how to use restorative language with our stakeholders. And throughout the training today, Dr. Jackson and myself, we will kind of go through, what does this look like for our students? Because we do interact with our students no matter at what level or position we are in. But then also, what does that look like for our colleagues, and then for working with your staff and your families? So hopefully today you can kind of see how you can use these pieces of restorative language with all of the stakeholders that you interact with. So where does this come from? Restorative practices is really the science of relationships and community. So if you are familiar with the work or you've heard about the work, everything that we talk about and everything that we train on stems from either building that relationship or establishing or repairing that community. So this came from the founder, Ted, and actually his wife, Susan Wachtel. They're the founders of IIRP, and this is kind of the foundation of where this all began. And from there, they created the basic premise. The basic premise of restorative practices is that human beings are happier, more cooperative and productive, and more likely to make a positive change in their behavior when those in positions of authority do things with them rather than to them and for them. And the with and the to are highlighted here because we could dive into that more in our overall training. But ultimately, when we are working together, right, we have high expectations for our buildings and we are supporting our people to get there. That is when we're going to see the biggest change in behavior, no matter if it's our kids or if it's the adults in our buildings. So from there, we have the aim. So kind of our goal of restorative practice is to develop that community and to manage conflict and tensions by repairing harm in relationships. We really focus here around about 80% of our time developing community, right? We really want to take the time and be proactive with our work, establishing those relationships, building that strong culture in that community of our buildings and of our districts, because we work in education and we know that there's going to be conflict, there's going to be tensions, and there's going to be harm. But it's really hard to mend and repair those relationships when we didn't have a strong community to begin with. So that is why we talk about 80% of the time we are working to develop that community, so that 20% of the time when we have to manage conflict, tensions, and repair that harm, we can do that successfully.
So what we have right here is the restorative practices blueprint. As you can see to my left, we have the proactive, which is in blue, and then to my right is the red, which is the responsive. Like Jen has said, we want to spend 80% of the time being proactive and 20% of the time responsive. And as you look to the bottom in the green, we have restorative circles that can be used proactively or responsive. But today, for the sake of time, we are focusing on restorative language. Restorative language, when it's used intentionally, is used to build positive relationships and promote understanding. Again, we want to continue to be in that 80%. If we move and switch over to our next slide, we are going to see at the end of the day, either we are going to spend the time meeting children's emotional needs by filling their cup with love, being proactive, right? 80%. Or we spend time dealing with the behaviors caused from their unmet needs, which is their responsive. Either way, we're going to spend that time. So we as educational leaders, we have to be intentional each and every day. How are we showing up to work, being proactive and meeting students where they're at, but also meeting adults where they're at, because we all have to have the growth mindset. So there are 3 elements to restorative language. We have restorative communication, effective language, and restorative questions. We are about to spend some time diving deep into this. But before, I want you all to just have this question in your mind. How do you communicate effectively with your staff? I know we're here virtually, but if you don't mind, you can put in the chat, how do you communicate effectively with your staff? And if you don't feel like putting in the chat, no worries. Think about this question as we continue to move forward with this presentation, because at the end of the day, restorative communication helps build positive relationships. So with this slide, we're going to have restorative communication. And as you see, it's a bridge to intentional communication. We as educators, we have to be intentional about how we communicate each and every day, because being aware that communication is more than just the delivering information. Think about it. Your body language, the tone that you deliver information, even the environment that you are in, all deals with restorative language. So when you as an educator is having an impactful conversation with the student, you have to be intentional in the environment. For example, my brief time, I had the privilege of being an assistant principal, and I knew with one specific student, I couldn't do that one step in the classroom or one foot door out in the hallway because I knew this individual did not like to have students walking around in the hallway seeing when I was correcting the behavior. So with that student, I had to be very intentional by bringing him or her to the classroom, actually to my office, and sit down and making sure that the lights were dim and the music was very calming and soothing so I can be able to meet the student where they're at. Again, this is just an example of me as an educational leader being aware that communication is more than just the delivery of the information. So let's go ahead and unpack the 4 R's. The first one is relationships, 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 relationships. As we as educators, we have to know at the end of the day, and as we go through this, that relationships are the foundational core of any school building, of any 500 company. Relationships are very essential. Positive communication builds positive relationships. And we know that negative communication degrades relationships. So all components of restorative communication starts with the principle of relationships. Let's go ahead and look at our second R. Recognition. We all want to be recognized for the greatness that we do. Even you all sitting on this call, think about your supervisor. How did that make you feel when your supervisor acknowledged the great things that you were doing? Because like we like to say in our consultant world, behavior is something people do. Value is something people are. We want to be intentional with separating the deed from the doer. Again, building on that relationship and being able to recognize that all individuals have a basic regard for the value of an individual life. And it's up to us in our roles to be intentional with how we communicate with all stakeholders. Let's look at the third R. Respect. RESPECT. Find out what it means to me. As I always say, I love to sing, but singing is not my calling. And as y'all can hear, I can't sing that well. However, I do understand the importance in my role and all the previous roles that I've had. Respect goes a long way. We as adults in our building, in whatever role that you play, you have to understand and know your own trigger. You have to recognize that your triggers make a respectful communication difficult. So that goes back to that self-reflection. And you as an individual taking accountability of understanding what levels of respect are warranted. And then also respect reaffirms our dignity. As we read at the bottom, it says, we may not respect what a person says or does, but we can be respectful in the way we communicate with and about them. Respect, respect, respect. And the 4R is responsible. Each and every one of us on this call has the responsibility to educate all students because each individual is responsible for understanding how their communication can impact others. See, value and not just a behavior equals progress. And at the end of the day, if we don't have these 4 R's, we are not moving the needle, not just for academic success, but in order for to have that academic success, we have to be willing to meet the students where they're at and building those positive relationships holistically. And as we click on this next slide, I want you all to just to have this in mind. It says, how do you see these 4 components impacting communication in your interactions? Jot this question down, take a screenshot, because at the end of the day, all individuals, all educators must operate in having that growth mindset. And when we do that, we understand that we are holding ourselves accountable. We understand that we're being open. And if we continue to do this daily, we will be able to embark on having restorative conversations.
Thank you, Dr. Jackson. So Dr. Jackson just kind of went over the restorative communication, the 4 R's, and that really is the foundation of restorative language. You have to know those pieces of the puzzle and they become who you are as a leader in your building. And then you can kind of add on these other 2 layers. But that restorative communication, those 4 R's really is that foundational piece. We're going to move into affective statements. Affective statements are something that you may have heard before, or hopefully maybe you've used before. It may have had a different name or something like that, but it is something that we tend to think of, we use with kids. But again, we can be using them with each other as colleagues and with the staff in our buildings. Every affective statement will start with an observation, then move to a feeling. You'll have some kind of need and a request, and we'll dive into that here in a moment. So affective statements are those I statements, right? Just best practice when it comes to education is using those I statements and those feelings of expression in response to some positive or negative behaviors. So it really helps to seek an understanding of how that behavior was either helpful or hurtful to the other person. Again, it teaches that language of emotion and it models for our kids. That's the one that has always stuck with me as an educator, no matter what role I'm in, even in this role as a behavior consultant, walking into schools, being able to model these things, showing our staff that it can be done is really powerful, even by somebody that isn't always in that same building every day. So again, those super simple I statements, I feel glad when, I feel mad when, and so forth. So an example that we would use with students, things like this happen all the time in our buildings, right? We get great things, but in just honor of time, we're going to show you a corrective statement here. You would start with what you observe. So when I see you push, or when I see you push another student, or when I see students pushing each other in the hallway, I get really frustrated or I get really scared because this classroom needs to be respectful, or this hallway needs to be respectful and safe for everyone. So please keep your hands to yourself. Yes, there is a little bit of a pattern and maybe scriptedness to an affective statement, but it doesn't have to be that way. The power in this is when it becomes natural, right? So you are observing. You don't want to say, hey, Dr. Jackson, I really think that you stole that pen off my desk, right? It's not something that you're thinking is happening. You actually saw it happen. It caused you as the educator to feel some kind of way, frustrated, scared, sad, angry, because you had a need, right? Your need goes back to some expectation that you have set in your building. So if in your building you have a school acronym that says, pride, and one of them is to be respectful, right? You would say, because I need this school to be respectful for everyone. Right there, you are constantly reinforcing those expectations that you and your staff worked so hard to build in the beginning of the year, and to teach your kids what that means. You are showing them it's important. And I want your behavior to change. And here's this expectation we set, and you're kind of marrying the two and showing its importance. And then that request, what do you need the kid or the adult to do moving forward? So this is a student example, but this can also be done when it comes to the adults in our building. So if you've ever had a staff member or maybe been the staff member that isn't at your place at the correct time during a transition, right? One of the places I always had to be was at the top of the stairwell. And if you have a staff member, for example, that is not in their place, instead of just constantly asking, why are you not there? You need to be there on time. If you come at it with this restorative lens and ask with an affective statement, you could say something like, hey, Jen, I've noticed that you haven't been at your assigned spot during transition several times this week. I'm getting really nervous because this is a really high trafficked area. And we really need everyone to be doing active supervision. So how can I help you get to your place on time? Or is there a barrier in place that I can assist you with? And so, yes, you're telling them, hey, I need you to be there, right? And here is why. But you're coming at it from that restorative lens, and people are more likely to change their behavior, be willing to have that conversation when we change our language. So again, a simple fix. One other thing to just mention with affective statements, if it ever is a safety concern, always address the safety first. right? And so I use the example of two students sprinting down a hallway, right? Yes, they should not be doing the 100-yard dash in our schools, but it happens. And so, address, please walk, please walk, please walk. And then, hey, come here. When I saw you running down the hallway, I felt scared that you might fall and get hurt. I need this hallway to be safe for everyone. So can you please walk the rest of the way to class? And so again, making it genuine and making it authentic to you and who you are as the educational leader is really important. This just kind of gives you a guideline of how to just change the things that you would already say, but to be more responsive and restorative. So the last piece of restorative language that we're going to touch on in these last few minutes is restorative questions. So when we train a school in restorative practices, they get a nice little card that's front and back, like the graphic you see on the right. But again, feel free and save this slide, take a picture of it. Just because if you are not a restorative practices school, it does not mean you can not use these questions. So feel free and use them to help guide conversations when it comes to behavior. These questions help to elicit a conversation after an event has occurred. They really help your students or adults focus on kind of what happened in the past, what is happening now, and how they are feeling about that situation, and what needs to be done moving forward to make things right. And so each sets of questions, and we're not going to dive into them, but they really just start with kind of what happened. You're allowing that person, the kid or the adult, to have their voice heard. You're allowing them to tell their side of the story. And even with our adults, this is really important. So allowing them to say kind of what happened, what were you thinking? How are you feeling now? And what have you thought about since that occurred? And then what needs to be done to make it right? So again, these are just two sets of questions that do kind of get intermixed and interchanged based on the situation. Um, Usually you tend to have somebody that has done some harm and was harmed, right? And so meshing these questions together is totally appropriate. But even with our adults, starting the conversation, if you have to have conversations with your staff, asking what happened. Okay, moving after we leave here, what needs to be done to make this right? Those two questions alone can change the community and the relationships that you have with your staff and with your students. And on the slide deck, they are linked. If you click on the title there, it'll take you to a resource on IIRP's website where you can access these questions and a little bit more information. So to wrap up today, Dr. Jackson did a wonderful job talking with us about the 4 R's of restorative communication. And then we briefly touched on affective language and affective statements and how you can use those with your staff and with your students. And then also that link again for restorative questions and how you can use those to guide conversations when it comes to behavior. And that is all we have for you all today. We really thank you guys for being with us and giving us this opportunity to share this information. Dr. Jackson's and myself's, our emails are on the screen. Feel free and reach out if you would like to continue this conversation. We're happy to have the conversation with you. Go to a Google Meet or something. We are really passionate about this work, and we would love to help you in this restorative journey as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jennifer and Angel, for sharing with us today. We did finish a little bit early, so if you don't mind, if you'll stay in this room until about 1:10, and then you're welcome to join your next breakout room whenever you're ready. After that, we have a 10-minute break built in. If you would like to ask a few questions, now's a good time, and you're welcome to do that. Okay, thank you both again for sharing.